So we want to socialize dogs to anything they'll need to recognize as safe, and we generally recommend puppy preschools, but they do have to be run well, because you can actually make them worse, too. And the AVSAB, American Vet Society of Animal Behavior, has a puppy position statement, and the recommendation is generally you want to start them in a class between 8 and 16 weeks of age, really as close to 8 weeks as possible. And they ideally have one vaccine prior to the class, and the class is in a clean, sanitized area, and there are no sick pets. So if your pet's sick, it's not allowed to come that day. But on top of that, once a week is not good enough. They need continued socialization. We need to take them to our friends. They need to have play dates. They need to be play dates with vaccinated, well-behaved pets. Because, hey, you wouldn't let your kids hang out with other kids who swear and do naughty things. So the same thing here. They can learn a lot of unwanted behaviors if they're playing with other dogs who play inappropriately, like in an over-aroused manner. And then it's really essential that during the socialization period, they're having actually positive experiences. Because a lot of people will say, oh, I did take my dog to all these different environments, and he's still fearful. And then you ask them, well, how was he? What was his body language? And they're like, I don't know. And probably what they were doing is taking their dog around, and their dog was like freaked out the whole time, but they didn't notice. So they didn't actually train something good. So we want to make sure the dog is having a positive experience. And I have this stuff in a lot more detail in Perfect Puppy in 7 days, how to socialize the puppies even before they get adopted, and then how to socialize them once you get that puppy too. So overview, we went over why so many pets are fearful. And now let's look at the signs of fear and anxiety. And I think everybody would recognize that this is fear. The dog is cowering. So this dog, its muscles are tense. Its weight is distributed away. Its head is low or level. It's averting its gaze, so it's not looking directly at the hand. The ears are back. The tail is low and still. And if you looked at the feet, you would notice that the dog was sweating. Now, one thing that's interesting is you can also see the white of the dog's eyes. And that happens if the dog's head is pointed one way, but the eyes are pointed another. And that's called whale eye. And whale eye doesn't necessarily mean that they're fearful, because you can get the same type of look if, for instance, two dogs are playing together and one is in the front, and he wants to see where he's going so he doesn't crash, but he also wants to see the dog behind him. So their head would be pointed one way and the eyes would be pointed another. So usually when you're looking at these signs, you want to look for multiple signs. Now, there are often more subtle signs of fear and anxiety. So the obvious sign would be cowering, or the animal runs away, or it hides. But they can also just move away for a step, or look away, and people often miss that. They may pant when they're not hot. And it's especially panting with the commissures of the mouth back. They may lick their lips when food is not on its way. They may salivate, urinate, or defecate. They can be hypervigilant, which means they're glancing in many different directions for short periods of time. It would be like what you would do if you're walking late at night and you heard there was an axe murderer around. Be looking around. They may yawn. And a big thing is they often will look tired or move in slow motion. So some dogs actually start moving faster. They start jumping or pacing. And other dogs start moving in slow motion, so they shut down. And they can have a tense look on their face because their brow is furrowed. And often they'll stop eating. So they were eating, or they may have been eating, and then they suddenly stop. So we'll often use that as a measure of how comfortable are they right now. So here's an example of Jonesy after I had him for, I can't remember, 3 to 5 months. And in that time, I would take him in the car every day because I'd take him somewhere where I could work with him. So we might drive between 5 and 2 hours every day. And he would hide under the passenger seat, and I couldn't tell if he was happy or scared because as soon as we stopped, he'd bounce around like he was really happy. And then one day, after 3 to 5 months, I finally tied him out and videotaped. So tell me what signs you see that he's fearful. Yeah, his ears are back. He's being hypervigilant. His brow is furrowed, which is why he has a worried look. Yeah, he's moving in slow motion for Jack Russell. And I think somebody said cowering. Hiding. Yeah, licking his lips. Hiding again. Yawning. Panting. Yeah, he is. That's why he's earning his keep. Now he won't eat the treat, so I give it to the other dog to up its value. And now he eats it. So a lot of people would just think, oh, he's being good, because they don't know what signs to look for. So his ears were high and out to the side. He tries to hide. He's hypervigilant. He licks his lips. He yawns and looks tired. He pants. And he stops taking food. And he's moving in slow motion. And that's one that people often miss, moving in slow motion. Oops. Now, when we have this problem, our goal is to fix it. So what I want to do is put him in a happy state. So I could do that just by giving him treats. And when you do that, you want it to be, you don't want it to be treat, treat. If you give it too slow, the dog is thinking, happy, 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 ha. So I want it to be happy, 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 happy. So I want him treats coming fast, and when I know he's happy, then I could start slowing him down a little bit. What I'm going to do instead of just treats here is have him perform behaviors that keep him focused. So behaviors that he enjoys, because that's going to keep his attention off the scary thing. So I'm going to have him do a bunch of tricks, and believe it or not, yeah, he usually isn't allowed to do tricks in the car. It's not like, so I had to train this right before. So the tricks are head down, spin, twist, paw your face, and then target this thing behind him. There. Now, how do you know that he's happy? What body language says he's happy? Tail wagging, alert. Moving faster, ears forward. Yeah, eating. His tail is wagging high. Yeah, he's offering the behavior quickly. There's not hesitation.
Yes. Head down.
Yeah, he's just focused on me.
Yes. Spin.
Okay, now I'm going to turn the car on. Okay, what do you see? Ears. How's his energy level? It's slow now. And he's being hypervigilant, but in slow motion, so people don't recognize it as hypervigilance. He's still trying to do the behaviors, but he's not doing them as well, right? Now, in the old days, I would have thought, oh, he's being stubborn, and I would have given him a correction with a choke chain. Because that's what they did in the obedience competition. They're just being stubborn. But he's trying the best that he can. Look how sleepy he looks. But he's trying. So he's having a little bit of a good experience here compared to before. compared to no food. There, I just turned it off. You see immediately his tail wags, he starts moving faster, he can perform better, he's more focused on me. So the reason Jonesy's so hard is he shuts down so much. So he might go from room to room. In one room he acts normal, in the next room he's shut down. And in fact, he would do this in my house even until more recently, maybe I think 6 to 8 months ago. So with him, even if he's in a dead sleep, if I get up and walk away, he should get up and bounce after me. And if he doesn't, if he walks like a regular dog, that means he's scared. So it is important to know what's normal for that dog too. Because sometimes you do get really lazy dogs that walk in slow motion. So our indicators of fear were that overall cowering posture, as well as more of the subtle signs, like the yawning and moving in slow motion. So we just looked at how to recognize fear and anxiety. And now it's why and how it turns to aggression. So often people will say, well, my dog's fearful, but don't worry, he'll never hurt a fly. Well, when we see fear, we want to address it for a number of reasons. And one of the reasons is it may look different in different situations, or it may turn into aggression down the road. So here's an example. This is a dog that the owner says it's protective of her. The dog is fine in doggy daycare. As soon as she gets it out of doggy daycare, it might bark at people when it's on leash. So what is the demeanor of a protective dog, would you think? What do you think the personality of a protective dog should be? Confident, right? How many people should think his personality should be fearful? Yeah, no. Okay, so let's look at this dog. Dog's in my house without the owner, and he's afraid of the camera, so I'm carrying a camera. Does he look confident? No. Now the owner's going to be in the picture here in just a sec. Oh yeah, and Zoe's like, hey, there's nothing in that backpack. Okay, the owner's here. If the dog is protecting the owner, what should it do? It should jump in front of her, and he doesn't.
Okay, reprimand him.
And then she tells the dog to sit. Now, does the dog really care what she said? What tells you no? He's still looking at me, right? He sat, so a lot of owners will think, oh yeah, he listened to me. But when you look at where they're looking, the dog is like, hey lady, don't you even notice that there's this scary thing?
Okay, now you walk away.
And she walks away, he's like, uh-oh. Okay, why do you think the dog would be worse in the owner's presence? She's reinforced the behavior, or she gives him confidence somehow, just enough confidence. So it's basically if you're with friends, you can be mean to other people. But if you're on your own, you have to be nice. With your friends, you have backup. So she's like backup to her dog. He just knows that I have somebody to help me. That's somebody that I can recruit to help me if there's a scary situation. The second thing is that when he is with her, he's usually on leash. And for one thing, when dogs are on leash, they're going to be more vulnerable because they can't get away. So it'd be like if you're walking down the street, or here's me, walking down the street in San Francisco. So I used to work at a hospital in San Francisco, and I'd walk my dog there when I was there through a bad neighborhood with junkies and stuff, and gangs, and weird people who scream and yell. Because you know, San Francisco, right? People are screaming and yelling at themselves. Now, if you see somebody like that coming, you would feel okay if you can cross the street. However, if you see that person coming and suddenly your coat gets stuck on something and you can't move, and that person's coming closer, then you might become defensive and tell them to back off because you can't get away. So dogs are more likely to be aggressive when they're on leash because they can't get away, so they have to hurry up and defend themselves. So one is that she she reinforces him just because of her presence. And secondly, that he learns to be more aggressive around her because he's had a lot of experience where he's on leash and he can't get away, so he's more scared. And third, when he's on leash and he starts to react aggressively, she does things that probably increase his arousal. For instance, she yells, "No, no." And because he's in a high arousal state, he's hearing, "Go, go." So basically anything that increases their arousal or that does not get them to calm down or focus back on you probably is reinforcing the behavior. So dogs have 3 ways that they can cope with fear. They can fight, they can flee, or they can freeze. Now at first, animals mostly will be startled and freeze, and then they may flee. But dogs can easily learn that barking works because they bark when they're startled. And all of these same responses, all these responses have the same physiologic response. You get an epinephrine surge in the short term, and then in the longer term you get a corticosteroid increase. So they can learn that if fleeing and freezing don't work, that they should fight. And once they learn that, then they have learned, or they quickly learn, that offense is their best defense. And now when they're afraid, they don't do that backing away. They do the let's stand up straight and approach it head on. So here we have the ears up, head high, body high, tail high, forward, leaning forward. And people will often say, oh, this is a dominant stance. What this really is a high arousal stance. This is the same stance my dog has when I throw the ball and he can't get to it, or there's a squirrel and he can't get to it. So he's not trying to be higher ranked. This does not mean he's trying to be higher ranked, because dogs have this when they're not trying to be higher ranked to their tennis ball, or a squirrel, or a cat. They're just excited. So it's just a posture of high arousal. So if dogs have learned that their offense is their best defense, how do we know that fear is the cause? Well, we know because dogs showed signs of fear in this context before, or they still show fleeting signs of fear. So for instance here, what can you see this dog doing? Can you see where it's standing? On the owner's foot? Yeah, so it would, and then it would back up and stand on the owner's feet. Now here's the dog in its house.
And we'll just let her bark for a
At the
little
end of the leash, barking. Tail wagging just means high arousal, doesn't mean friendly. So these dogs that you see barking like this, they're high arousal. You don't know what they're going to do when they come to you. What they do probably depends on what you do. If you hold still and they were fearful, they'll probably go, I'm not sure what to do, and I'm not getting attacked, so maybe I'll just go back. If they're running up to you because they're excited and you hold still, well, then they're again like, oh, now what do I do? You've seen where the doorbell barks, the doorbell rings, the dogs bark, you open the door, and the dogs run out and go like, hey, where is that bad guy? And you're standing right there. The person's still standing at the door. The dogs are just, so they don't do anything. If you react differently, like you get excited, then if the dog is fearful, your excitement may get the dog more scared and realize, oh yeah, you're even more scary, I better bite. Or if the dog is high arousal just because it's excited but not fearful, and you scream, the dog may get excited and go, oh yeah, now I just grab you. Just like dogs do at the park when they hear another dog squeal and they just all run in. They're not thinking, they're just getting excited and reacting. So here's this dog in a different context.
You can step away.
Was barking at me in one context and look at me in this different context. Now, clearly fear. Okay, so next we want to go over what do we do to unintentionally make that fear worse. So that's a PSA that we have on our website that you can actually use for Dog Bite Prevention Week if you want. And we also have a PowerPoint that you can download and use for free too. So how many people have had a dog who's fearful and then another person wants to come up and pet your dog and you say, oh no, he's fearful, and they go, but I love dogs and I have a special way with them, right? And then they get bitten and they're like, I can't believe it, I was just trying to be friendly, and they're so offended. And so what I do is I explain, well, imagine if you were a spider and somebody put this in your face. You wouldn't care if it was a friendly baby spider who volunteered at the shelter. You're just afraid of spiders. So we have to take things from the dog's point of view. Often people will say, well, my dog's fine in public. Well, that's because the dog only sees this. And then they say, but sometimes when people look at him, then he barks. Because when people look at him, it looks like that. Because he's afraid of people. And then people have learned, oh, put your hand out and let him smell it. And now it looks like this. So when you put your hand out to the dog and the dog is afraid of you, to the dog, your hand might as well be this. Because they're afraid of you. It seems like it's a weapon. And then a lot of people say, well, get down to the dog's level. And you do that, and now you look like this. Your face is right in their face. Well, it's true that if you're really tall, you're going to be scarier than if you're shorter. However, if you do get down to the dog's level, you should be far enough away or you should be turned sideways. And then a lot of people will say, well, Dr. Yin said you should give treats. But then they do it this way. Which looks like they're setting the dog up for the kill. So it is important how you give a treat. Something as simple as giving a treat, yes, you can give it incorrectly. So if you're going to give treats, you want to be sideways, and you can just toss them whatever distance the dog feels comfortable. So we need to be sideways. So we just went over what we unintentionally do to make it worse, or what some people do to make it worse. So now, how do we make it better? Well, we want to learn how to approach and greet dogs correctly. And when we do this, we want to think, well, how would we want a spider to greet us? A lot of people probably don't want to be greeted by a spider, right? But let's say you have to. Well, you'd probably feel most comfortable if the spider was in a terrarium, because then it can't get to you. You can control your distance. And that's what the dog wants too. The dog wants to be able to control the distance. So let's stay out of the dog's personal space. And we want to avoid eye contact, because if we're looking at the dog knows we're thinking about him. If I was walking down San Francisco in that gangy neighborhood and then somebody stared at me, that would make me really nervous. And we want to let the dog come up to us. So let the dog make first contact when he's ready. And then we want to move slowly and smoothly. So for instance, let's say if I was really comfortable with that spider and I could even touch him, if that spider suddenly sprinted, I wouldn't know what that means, and so I'd have to smash him. Because, hey, it could mean that he's going to kill me, and I only have this much time to react, versus if he's moving slowly, I can react more slowly. Then it's really important to relax, because if you're not relaxed, you're going to move in a suspicious manner, in an abnormal way. And a good example of this is, imagine that it's 100 degrees outside and you go into a bank and everybody's wearing shorts except for the one guy who comes in wearing an overcoat who's hypervigilant. So you would be pretty sure that that person is about to rob the bank. You don't need any special smell or pheromone released. You just see that he's acting oddly. So if you act oddly, then the animal's going to get nervous. And that's why dogs will often bark at people with disabilities, because they're moving in different ways, in an abnormal way. And then lastly, when we greet these dogs, we really want to watch the dog's body posture, because we need to change what we do based on the dog's response. So you don't want to just memorize do this. Everything is based on, well, what's the response and how do I adjust based on that response? Now, what about using a happy voice? What about talking to the dog? Well, when I'm working with fearful dogs, I always imagine, what would I do? What would you do? What would you want to have done if you were in a scary situation? So imagine you were going to the dentist and you were going to get a root canal and you don't like going to the dentist. And so you go there and the dentist is trying to make you feel better. So they go, it's okay, don't worry, you'll be okay, it's okay. You'd feel kind of nervous, huh? Like, this person doesn't know what they're doing. I want to go to somebody else. So number one, avoid nervous chatter. Secondly, if you go to the dentist and the dentist goes, sit, you probably would not want to go to the dentist because he's mean. And then what if you had that very compassionate dentist who is saying, it's okay, don't worry. This root canal won't hurt that much with all the drilling. So what's happening there is that person's just making you think about how bad that root canal will be. They're being nice, but they're just keeping your mind on the bad thing. So ideally, what you want to do is take their mind off the bad thing that's going to happen. So what I'll do with dogs is I tend to use a happy voice and see how they respond. If I get a response that says that they're relaxing, then I'll use that more. If I don't get a response, then I might try it again later on. I tend to avoid using a calm voice because I usually don't see a change in the dog. However, maybe a calm voice would help the human. So if they have to talk, maybe using a calm, slow will be okay. So when I greet, when you see this dog who looks ambivalent, you're not sure, it's not openly friendly, you want to be very careful how you approach, because if you approach wrong, you'll get this. Now, if you get cowering in this one dog, that means in another dog it would have been an attack. So you don't want to make this happen. What I want to do is, if I have to get closer to the dog, then I'm going to approach backwards or sideways. So here when I approach backwards, then she feels comfortable enough to take treats. I give enough treats so she's starting to think, hey, maybe this is okay. So not just one big treat, but multiple small treats. And then when she's feeling more comfortable, then I can turn and face her more. Of course, I'm not head on, but I could face her more directly, sort of sideways. Now, often if you're sitting, the dog feels more comfortable than when you're standing. But then realize that when you do stand, it might scare the dog. So you need to toss treats when you change that body position. And then when you do stand, if you're tall, you have to be careful that you don't lean over the dog. Because, hey, the dog was okay until you suddenly leaned over. So here he's bending his legs. Okay, let's look at this greeting and see what goes right and what goes wrong.
Hi. Well, you look friendly. Hi. How you doing?
Okay, what did she do right? Oh, two things. Happy voice. She did the happy voice, and you could see that the dog started wagging his tail. What did she, oh, and then she walked away when she scared the dog. What did she do wrong? She leaned over and she approached him head on. Now, how often do you see that in a professional setting, like a hospital, a groomer, or a kennel? Every day, right? We are so lucky that people don't get bitten every day in those situations. Now here she's going to try again. So this time she's going to just drop treats. Now notice that the dog is moving at a regular speed, which is good. He's not moving in slow motion, so he feels comfortable enough to move at a regular speed. This dog does have a history of biting. Just so you know, there's some stakes here. She could get bitten. We should have scary music. Now she's changing her body posture, so she's giving him treats. Now you know your training is good when everybody wants to join in. Now look, he's even offering to sit, which is even better than just taking treats, but it doesn't mean he's safe to pet yet. He has a history of biting, so we're not just going to pet him. What I want to do is have him eating And when he's eating, she can put her hand out.
Now,
But watch how she does this incorrectly. I would like to make sure he's eating first, but she reaches out. So what could have happened is he saw the hand and just went for the hand. But right there, he probably thought, oh, that other hand might have food too. So he's pretty comfortable with her. She's petting, she gives the treats, and then she's able to pet him. And when I do that, it's specifically, we're counter-conditioning him at this stage. If I was going to just pet him, I wouldn't reach out like that over his head. I would get really close, so my arm was attached to my body. No, none of this. It's basically like this. You get close to them sideways, and then maybe you put your hand out. But you don't put your arm out. It's like this is all I have. Because this is what scares them more. But here we're specifically counter-conditioning him. Hey, I put the treat out. He should be eating. I know he's calm. And then I put my hand out whatever distance I feel that he's comfortable. And I chose over the head because that's the easiest place I can see if I'm going over a threshold, and which we'll talk about later on. So you don't want to reach over the head if you're just petting a dog for the first time, but if you're counter-conditioning, you want to reach where you can read what the dog is thinking, or what his emotional state is. And if you go under, that's very close to, he doesn't have to change any body posture to bite you. Right? Does that make sense? It's just like eating, chomp. Versus this, it's like, hey, I see something coming. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, often you give the dog some treats and the dog seems pretty comfortable, and then something goes wrong. So what might happen? Well, did you ever see the wild dingo on the David Letterman show? There wasn't a wild dingo. What happened was there was a dog on Stupid Pet Tricks, and it was really friendly, and he was petting it, and then he went down to kiss it, because, you should kiss all dogs, right? Okay, I did not say that. That was, don't go out saying I said that. You should not kiss dogs. So he leans over to kiss the dog, and then the dog snaps at him, and luckily it didn't bite him. So then he kept, for many shows after that, he kept talking about how he had a wild dingo on the show. So of course what happened is that he suddenly moved in a way that was scary to the dog. So we have to imagine that, remember, just because they got used to us in one situation doesn't mean that they're comfortable in all situations. So for instance, if I have that spider and I feel really good that I'm comfortable with the spider, and should I feel comfortable if he suddenly sprints or moves fast? No, because I don't know what that means. I may have to smash him, remember, because it's fast and I don't know if he's about to kill me. Then, how about the situation where I'm petting the spider, I'm all comfortable, and he starts going, bzz, bzz, it's okay, bzz, it's okay. Okay, I don't know what that means. It seems kind of strange, even if he's saying it's okay. And then let's say, I feel really good. I'm really proud of myself. I did so well with the spider. I feel completely calm. And then it's time for me to go home. And I walk out the door. I get in the car. And then I'm thinking about how great everything went. I adjust the mirror. And, oh my gosh, there's a spider. He's in the back. That would freak you out because you're not used to, you weren't prepared for it. And frequently that happens. You walk out of the room, and then you come back in and the dog barks. And then imagine you feel really, really comfortable, and then if you leave, are you going to feel better on day 2? It depends. You might be just as scared or almost as scared again. It depends on how ugly the spider was, if you had chocolate. It'll depend on a lot of different factors. Okay, so we just looked at how to greet a dog, how to approach a dog that might be fearful. We want to stay out of the dog's personal space and let the dog make first contact. If we have to approach the dog, we want to face sideways and avoid a direct gaze. We want to move slowly and smoothly and avoid sudden movement. And in addition to all that, we do want to give the dog give the dog time to get used to our presence. So in that vet hospital setting, you don't want to just rush up. You want to the vet should go in the room and then just talk to the owner a little bit so the dog can just realize that Nothing's going to happen to me right away. Okay, now we want to apply those same principles to greeting. Now we want to apply those greeting principles to other types of interactions. Okay. Yes.
I volunteer at a shelter, and we have varying degrees of experience.
Yeah. I know volunteer situation's hard because there's so many cycling through and trying to train them up.
One thing that I've noticed a lot, and I'd like you to comment on it, is when dogs do demonstrate these signs, whether that they're fearful, a lot of people make corrections, and then the dog, won't do that, and then there will be no warning, and then they'll bite. What do you, in terms of correcting that behavior, do you try to divert them and get them to do something that you want them to do? Or?
So the first thing that I do, so the question is, what do you do in a shelter situation where the people tend to, if the dog shows signs of anxiety, then,
Fear or aggression
so specifically like they're pacing or they bark and lunge.
Yeah, bark and lunge.
So they pace and they bark and lunge. Well, we get to those later on, what to do with your reactive dog. Reactive dog, those things come in the later lectures, and that's all tomorrow where I go over how to move in ways to keep your dog focused on you. And we look a little bit at it in the next section. But the first thing I do with people is train them body language. So even my dog classes now, what we do is we have our introductory lecture. We broke it up into segments, and the first part is like just a short segment on body language, and then we do a little game show with our and in fact we might do some here with the people in the class where they have these list of questions, and then they talk about it together, and then they answer them, and then because of that they're actually able to recognize the body language of fear. And then in the first class, some of the questions we ask them are, watch your dog when people greet him. What is the body language he's showing? And then what is the body language he's showing at the beginning of the class versus the end also. And so now what we have, since we started doing that, is that the owners now all understand when their dogs are fearful, which is huge, because before we might tell them and they didn't believe. Or what would it be is my co-instructor would tell them and they wouldn't believe her. They wouldn't believe it until I told them, but now they believe her too. So, or if one of the volunteers goes up, they believe because they recognize it themselves. So that's the first thing I do in those type of situations. And then how do we deal with those dogs that are reactive? We'll cover that in the next sections. Okay, so now we want to know, how do we apply the greeting principles to different situations? So here's an example. This is a dog from the shelter, and it's in quarantine. And I know that it has a history of having bitten someone. So I can't take the dog out of this actual ward, but I can take it out of its cage. So you can see that this dog is fearful.
Yeah, now that he's...
And I'm going to try to be as sideways as possible. But, in real life, well, I can only be this sideways. But at least I'm not leaning forward staring at her. Now I'm just going to stay between her. I'm going to keep the rope between her and me, and so if she leaps forward, she's going to leap into that. So I do get it on her. And now, interestingly, once you walk these dogs out, most of them are way better because they're out of their defensible space. So now I'm walking her around. Okay, I just said, I tried to use happy voice there. I did not get a positive response. I just got no response. Her tail is down. I offer a treat. She doesn't want it. I'm going to take my hand away, because if you keep holding it there, that's when they go, hey, wait a sec, it is a knife. Okay, I used happy voice again, and she didn't care. So now I'm going to show you she's not ready to be touched. So I normally would not try to touch him here. But if you keep trying this, this is where you're going to get bitten. Okay, then when you go back in the cage, you should lead them in. You need to use your momentum to walk them in. And you'll see more about this later in the day. So I opened that back so she had a place to go, because you don't want to walk them into a closed area if you can make that area open. And then here, to get this leash off, I'm using the special leash where you just pull on the string and it makes the leash loosen. And you can make these yourself. You just get a British style slip lead and then you tie a string to the ring. And actually we have on our website how to do this. Okay, so now I go in again. And what I want to show you is here is, what I'm doing is I'm trying to decide, should I show you this later on? I'll tell you about it now, and I'll explain it to you now. So one of the things that's really important is approaching right, but also controlling movement is important, and I talk about that more in the low stress handling portion. And so right here what I'm doing is I go in and I decide I'm going to practice putting this muzzle on. And it's a leash muzzle, and for some reason I decide I'm going to do a version that I've never done before, and practicing on an aggressive dog. So I don't recommend that. I recommend that you practice it on a stuffed animal, and then a real dog, and then an aggressive dog once you can do it well. But because of the way I do this, I can get it done, and the dog is relatively low stress level. So what I do is I go in, and because I approach sideways, I'm able to be close to her. So she has a wall on the left side, I'm on her right side, she can't back up well, and so I'm able to be close enough to her to control movement. So now that I can control her movement, I'm holding her collar too. Because of that, I'm able to put this leash muzzle on, even though I'm doing it in a very inept way.
I think I could get a...
It should be on by now. And again, the reason I'm able to be this close to her is because I've approached sideways. If I approached forwards, I would freak her out. If I was facing her, I'd freak her out, but I'm sideways to her. And now I have her mouth controlled, so I can pet her head. I have both her head and mouth controlled, so I'm petting her, and she's leaning into it. So now I've actually found something she likes, which was surprising to me. I didn't think she would like that, but hey, that's why you try everything. That's why we do things systematically, because you don't know.
Can you tell me what's like eating?
And then let's see, is she better or worse? Because when I interact with a dog, my goal is they're better or at least the same. I don't want to make them worse. I want them the same or better. So then I walk out, and 10 minutes later again, I go up. So is she better or worse? Better. And I didn't use food, because people think this is all about food. No, it's about learning to approach right and control their movement and then offer them something that they like, which happened to be petting here. Okay, here's another example of how we're going to use the correct approach. So the first thing I want to do is show you that this dog can be aggressive. So if you do that, the dog's going to be aggressive. So how do I get the dog from this person? From the back, one-handed from the back. So she doesn't see. Okay, now here's the wrong way. From the side, the dog can see. Now you're going to get two people bitten.
Did you see what you did wrong there?
So the difference between the dog that's calm and the dog that's aggressive is just how you approached. So a lot of people think, well, I don't have time to deal with these aggressive dogs nicely. Well, what, you can't figure out how to approach right? It's not time, it's skill. So we've gone over why so many pets are fearful, how to recognize fear and anxiety, how and why fear can turn to aggression, what we unintentionally do to make the fear worse, and what we can do to avoid making it worse on initial greeting. So now I just want to touch on how unruly behavior can lead to aggression. So in the vet hospital, fear is the number one cause of aggression. And the number two cause is that animals just get unruly. So here's an example. This is the typical puppy, but the owners are complaining that they have bite marks all up and down their arms. Now, do they have bite marks because the dog is trying to be higher ranked? What do you think is what's happening? The dog wants to play, and they play with their teeth.
I'm gonna let her do this kind of naughty behavior.
So I said ow, and the dog didn't care, because often they don't care. And she's just jumping all over me. Now, if I tried to hold her still, she would still struggle, just because it's exciting, and the more they do it, the more they think that's play. So the more I hold her, the more she's going to struggle, because the owners have taught her that struggle more, and I'll let you go, and this is a fun game. So here's the same thing in an older dog, 10 months old. She wants to play, so she just jumps and grabs a mouth. Is this safe? No. So a lot of people say, well, maybe they'll grow out of it. Well, maybe they will, or maybe they'll turn into this, which isn't that bad yet.
That's really bad. I don't like that.
And one thing about this dog is that when I hold completely still, she does sit, and then I can reward her for more appropriate behavior. Usually you want to train the more appropriate behavior first, so they'll offer it sooner. But look at this dog. Here's this dog in a different situation. So the same thing, she's learned that when somebody wants to hold you, just get more excited, more and more excited. And so now when they want to hold her in the vet hospital situation, she just gets overly aroused and then becomes aggressive.
Oh no.
Okay, she's ready.
Oh yeah.
Oh, pretty.
Now here's another dog. So if you're carrying a flashlight and it makes Halloween sounds, I don't know where you would get this. Then the dog wants it, and does this seem safe? No. But he's just excited and he just wants to play. This dog does not even know a sit. I have not been able to get a sit with him prior because the owner fed him.
There's other noises.
So imagine if this dog got loose and wanted to run and grab something someone had. That would turn into a mauling. That person would scream, and the dog would get more excited and grab more things. So I do hold still, and I'm just hoping the dog will sit so I can get something.
Fortunately, it's not something you give to kids.
Yeah.
I accidentally turned the flashlight back on. It's making the Halloween sounds again. Okay, finally sits, and then I want to hurry up and give him what he wanted, because that's all I have as a reward. So arousal and aggression are on a continuum. That's why we need to deal with arousal and impulsivity, which we go over tomorrow morning. So what do we do to fix it? Well, I want to train a more appropriate behavior. So for instance, the puppy gets excited. I trained sit 5 minutes ago. Then I'm just going to wait. Then he's going to sit because we practice sit. So I'm just going to train him. We're going to interact by you sit, and that's where you get rewards. And then I only pet you when you're sitting.
So when she jumps,
And then for the handling, we specifically pair the food with the handling. And here's the dog at the end of puppy class. And the dog is even good, even though it doesn't fit in her lap. So our summary is that the most common cause of aggression is fear. And as a result, it's really important to learn signs. And it's really important to teach everybody, like clients, people in dog classes, anybody who works with animals. We also need to make sure that we avoid making the fear worse. So we need to recognize the signs so that we can avoid making the situation worse. And instead, our goal is to make it better. We also learn that pets can also just be unruly, and this can develop into aggression too. So I'm going to test yourself. My dog's adopted. He's afraid of men. Do you think he was abused in the past? No. Yeah, no. What do you think has most likely happened? He what? Yeah, incomplete socialization. So he didn't get socialized to that type of person. How about, my dog seems okay when people come over. He barks at first and then seems to calm down and even take some treats. But when they go to get up, he may snap at them. Why is he so inconsistent? But he was okay when they were sitting, so. Yeah, the change in body position is scary. Yeah, so he's okay when they're sitting because he got counter conditioned to their sitting, but he needs to get counter conditioned to their getting up and moving. So this information is all in the low stress handling book and DVD. And then also I have a longer version of this in this DVD, which is actually called Creating the Pet-Friendly Hospital, Animal Shelter or Pet Care Business. We changed the title. And then remember, you can download discussion questions for this lecture and a longer version of it on this page, drsophiayin.com/CE, and that's actually up now. Methods for reversing fear and aggression in dogs in the hospital and home setting. When we're talking about modifying behavior in dogs, we are talking usually, or what we should use, are two pairs of techniques. We are going to use desensitization paired with classical counterconditioning and desensitization paired with operant counterconditioning. And this information is in both the low stress handling book and How to Behave So Your Dog Behaves. In general, there are 4 methods of modification. There's habituation and counterconditioning, and then those can be broken up further. So habituation can be broken into flooding and desensitization, and then counterconditioning can be broken into classical counterconditioning and operant counterconditioning. So first I'm going to go over habituation. So this is a scientific definition, so just kind of listen to it, because sciencey definitions, you're like, okay, now say it in the real words. Habituation means that through repeated exposure to the stimulus with no negative effects, the animal gets used to it. So the animal basically gets used to it or stops responding. So with repeated exposure and no negative consequences, the animal stops responding. So for instance, let's say that you live in a really quiet neighborhood and then you move to New York City. And it's really, really noisy with all the traffic, and so you can't fall asleep. But with repeated exposure where you're just hearing it all the time and nothing bad happens, then you just get used to the sound and you don't really perceive it. Another example is, say you have a dog that's afraid of a radio. So it's showing high anxiety at first with the sound of the radio, but with habituation over time, we get less and less of a response to the same amount of sound. So the animal is just getting used to it. Here's an example. This is a dog that's afraid of Captain Kirk. Now, after several days, nothing bad has happened because Captain Kirk has not tried to pet him. So he's just getting used to it. So through repeated exposure with no negative effects, he just stops responding. Now, there's 2 types of habituation. There's flooding and there's desensitization. With flooding, you present the stimulus full force, meaning at full force, this dog is going to have a reaction. And you hope that over time, with this stimulus just really loud, so this could be the radio, the dog is just locked in the room with the radio and the radio is turned on loud, that the dog starts responding less and less, so he just gets used to it. So what about flooding? Well, remember Jonesy, he was in the car every day for 5 months, somewhere, 4, 7, no, not 7, probably 5 at the most. But it was every day from 2 hours to as little as 5 minutes, but it was every day and he never got used to it. And how about this example? This is a typical vet hospital example. You handle the animal and you flood it, and you may do it every time you see the animal, and it just doesn't get better. How about this case? You're afraid of a spider, so somebody just holds you and sticks that spider in your face. So when you see this, how many people think this person's going to actually get better with the spider? Yeah, she might hold still, but it's not because she's feeling better internally, it's because she's now catatonic. And then what happens is that once she's out of the situation, then she's probably going to see spiders all over the place, meaning a lot of types of things are suddenly going to look like spiders. So what happens is that she's going to become sensitized. So one problem with flooding is that you can become sensitized, and what happens in that case is you become more and more reactive to less and less stimulus. So in this case, we have the dog who was flooded, and now, so it's being flooded right here with the radio, and it was anxious before, but it gets more and more anxious at the same level of sound. So a problem of flooding is that the animal can get sensitized. So how do we prevent that? What we'd like to use is desensitization. So instead of flooding, we prefer to use desensitization. With desensitization, you start with the stimulus low enough so that the dog does not respond, or he's just minimally responding. So you're right at or below threshold. And then when you're absolutely sure that he's okay and he's not responding negatively, then you can increase the level. So here I can turn the radio up, but when I turn it up, I want to make sure that his response is minimal or no response, so he looks the same. And then I don't want to go to the next step until I'm absolutely sure he's not responding, so he's having no response. So again, I increase the level, but my goal is I only increase it a little bit, so I'm getting little or no response. So when I desensitize, I want to stay below threshold. So below the threshold where he's going to respond. So here's an example. In this case, we put the spider in the terrarium, and she can go to whatever distance she feels comfortable. Now, let's say that she's so scared of spiders that she can't be in a room with a spider. What else could I use to desensitize? I could use a picture of a spider. What else could I use? Like, what if the realistic picture is even scary for her? Like maybe a cartoon, a cute spider? Okay, so we try that. We use a stuffed spider puppet. Is she getting desensitized there? No, because there's a reaction. So if you're getting a reaction, it's not desensitization. So a lot of times you'll look on YouTube and it'll say, desensitizing a dog to blah, 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 and then you see the dog's aggressive and he's acting fearful. That's not desensitization. It's flooding. With desensitization, you stay below threshold. You only have a minimal or no response. Now, one thing about habituation is that it's very specific, and it's specific for a reason. Because imagine that you feel really comfortable with this spider now. You can touch it, you can hold it. Does that mean you should feel comfortable about touching this spider? No, that